Tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Rosie.
I'm Jake.
And today we're talking about Thundercats, which I chose because we've been watching it lately, and I did used to enjoy it as a youngster somewhat, although I have to confess it was never one of my favourite shows. Is it from 1983?
Well, what you can read if you're interested, and it is moderately interesting, I suppose, is that it was animated, recorded, obviously, first in 1983, but it didn't get around to being shown on US television until 1985. And I'm not sure exactly when it was first shown on UK television, but CBBC had the first season. There are 4 seasons, and we were really only aware of the first until the advent of the internet and looking up and discovering these things. And they showed it a lot of times, and as has been mentioned before, it was shown quite a lot on going live on Saturday mornings, which is certainly what I associate it with. Although I know we did see it sometimes in the afternoons on CBBC, and latterly, in the 90s, it was on before school sometimes. But all of that was the first 65-episode season that had been animated in 1983 and then held back and then bought by BBC eventually. They obviously never thought it was worth getting seasons 2, 3 and 4, and I don't know if this was a conscious decision. They thought, oh well, we've got 65 episodes, we can show them through over and over again, that's fine. Or if they thought, not paying for these other seasons that have gone rather askew. I suspect they probably didn't delve that far into it, but certainly I don't think it was a bad thing that we missed those when we were young. We certainly got all the Thundercats we wanted and needed.
When I was little, I remember I didn't really understand it. I thought that they didn't really look enough like cats, and I was thinking, well, why are they called cats? They don't look that much like cats. Okay, Lion-O's called Lion-O, but he's not that much like a lion. And then I didn't know what Thundercats meant, and I tried to get our mum to explain it. And she had picked up basically what it was all about, and she was saying, well, they're from a place called Thundera, and I was saying, but they're not there now, though, are they? Because I'd worked out that they were living on Earth, as in our Earth, and she did try to explain it to me, and I think she probably more or less understood it, but not enough to really satisfy me with all my questions. So it really took me till we got that video with, I was going to say, truncated versions of the first 4 episodes, but of course they've also got additional bits that aren't in the aired versions of those 4 episodes. So it's sort of a movie version of those episodes with some bits taken away and some bits added in, and it begins with the Thundercats escaping from Thundera, which is exploding like Krypton at the beginning of all the Superman things, except the New Adventures of Superman. And so I got the idea from that.
It really was a momentous day when we were given all these second-hand videos from a child who our aunt knew and used to sort of look after, who didn't want them anymore, because it got us back into He-Man, as may have been mentioned in our Masters of the Universe podcast, and the real Ghostbusters we watched on video for the first time in a long time. And there are a couple of other useful ones in there for reference, such as the Amazing Spider-Man. But that Thundercats video really was momentous for us both, I think, because when we watched it, we used to watch it quite a lot with our supper and things. We both enjoyed Thundercats more than we ever had before, I think it was fair to say. And having recently watched the first season through on DVD, and then the first 5 episodes of the second season movie version Thundercats Ho, and then the old video with the first 4 episodes movie version again as we used to watch when we were little, I think we very much both agree that that Thundercats Exodus video is the best way to watch Thundercats, and in many ways all you do need to watch, because it really always appealed to us in many ways, particularly the aspect that is introduced and hammered home and done very effectively of them all being stranded on Third Earth, as they call our Earth, along with the three mutants, the three antagonists, Slide, Monkey, and Jackalman, and they're all kind of together, antagonistic, trapped on this unfamiliar world, trying to survive in the best way they can, as Panthro says in the video. And towards the end of one of those episodes that make up the video, now we'll have to go about seeing if we can survive in this world. And we used to really engage with that concept, the kind of survival of the last few Thundercats, carrying the code of Thundera, which is very elitist, by the way, with them as they establish this new, smaller civilization to keep their race alive, and the mutants antagonizing them, as it was tantalizingly shown they always had. Again, it's Panthro, always those blasted mutants.
You said a smaller civilization. It's not just smaller in the sense that there's only 6 of them plus Snarf. It's also what they call a dinky galaxy. That's what Wily Cat called it. It's dinky is what it is, and they don't think much of the things that we have on Third Earth, like gold, and they would much rather have Thundrillium and things that they're used to, and it goes to point out how human beings are actually very insignificant, and the Thundercats are coming from a much bigger, much more advanced civilization, and they come and find the human race, as far as we can tell from the video anyway, all died out, and the remains of some kind of civilization, as the mutants point out when they find the Egyptian pyramids and stuff.
Yes, and very clearly the Sphinx, which is a huge sign that it's Earth, and anyone who doesn't realise is silly. But that, again, was another bit of the video that I always found particularly tantalising and well done, and really building up this concept, this stranded concept in the future of our planet, really very appealing. And I was slightly troubled when thinking about how it would have gone past the video, when all we had was the video, because I knew they must have kind of gone against that concept and that very nice setup that builds up through those first 4 episodes, because I remembered from going live Vultureman. Now, if Slide, Monkey, and Jackalman were really trapped there with no hope of ever summoning any other mutant ships again, as Mumm-Ra puts it, then how the heck did they get Vultureman? So I knew from my memory of childhood, that something must go against now we're going to see about surviving here on our own. And indeed, when I learned about seasons 2, 3, and 4, with the new Thundercats, with the Lunatics from the moons of Plunder, with new Thundera, I thought, crikey me, talk about going against a wonderful establishing concept that really made us engage with the show so well. I never wanted to see any of that. I just want to stick with the Exodus video. And then you very kindly got for me last Christmas, so almost a year ago, the first season of Thundercats on DVD, because we thought, it'd be good to see that. It shouldn't stray too far away from its premise. We don't get the new Thundercats. We'll get to see how Vultureman turns up, so it'll stray away a little bit, but we'll probably be able to cope with it. But goodness me, how quickly and how completely does it stray from that wonderful established original premise that we engaged with so much? Very quickly and very extremely. It's only on the second disc, I'm sure, where you get Mandora the Evil Chaser, and people can just drop in and out of Third Earth from space at the drop of a hat or the drop of a space bike, and the Thundercats can make contact with them. And that's where it starts. But before you know where you are, Mumm-Ra's giving the mutants their ship back. They are communicating with not just Vultureman, but other mutants from Plunder, including Rataro and other Jackalmans and Monkeys and Reptilians. And the Thundercats are communicating with base stations and prison planets and God knows what with their spaceship telescopic equipment, and I think, well, they're not stranded and desperately trying to survive now, are they? What a shame to drift away from that wonderful original premise so quickly. And I think you agree.
Oh yes, absolutely. I remember how they're in their spaceship with Jaga in Exodus, and they're desperately trying to get to Third Earth because their spaceship's been damaged and they couldn't get to this other place that they were heading for, which apparently was further away, so they'd have had to get in the suspension capsules anyway, and if you start picking apart things like that, it doesn't make quite so much sense. But they're not too happy with Third Earth and the dinky galaxy. They're not so sure they're going to be able to survive. Their spaceship's going to crash to pieces and they may die, but they don't. Jaga's saying to himself when he's left alone to pilot the ship until he dies.
I wish I were as sure of their chances as I pretended to be. But there is a chance.
And fortunately, they're okay, otherwise there wouldn't be a series. And then when they start having spaceships and things, I think to myself, well, if they really wanted to, they could go and live in this other place that they were planning on going to all along. And meanwhile, the mutants get their spaceship back, and I was very surprised, actually, when they were saying to Mumm-Ra, you made our spaceship sink in some mud or something, Mumm-Ra. You have to get it back for us so we can do this and that and the other. I can't remember what they were telling him was in it for him. I thought in that scene where they're making an unwilling allegiance with him, primarily out of fear of him, I think, and somewhat out of possible benefits, and they're saying, oh, we can fly off in our spaceship and get more mutants, and he's going, fools, your spaceship's sunk and stuff. I thought he was just showing them that they'd parked carelessly. I didn't realise he'd made it happen, and I thought that was better if they'd got themselves into this situation and there wasn't too much of Mumm-Ra manipulating everything. And I didn't get the impression he'd done that because they didn't seem cross with him about it. They just seemed miffed at the whole situation, so I found that a bit disappointing. But then of course he gets their spaceship back for them and they can nip back and forth and plunder whenever they feel like it. They followed the Thundercats to Third Earth, so presumably they were using suspension capsules too. I can't believe they've got more advanced technology where they can do
hyperspace jump or something.
So that doesn't really make enough sense for me and isn't very satisfying either.
Yes, it is a big step back from that lovely original premise, that episode, The Spaceship Beneath the Sands, where Mumm-Ra raises the spaceship. Of course, they're telling him, if you raise our spaceship for us, we can get all our technology from it. We're reduced to Stone Age weapons at the moment, we can't do it properly. And Mumm-Ra eventually agrees. And of course, I remembered something else I did actually remember from Going Live days, and had to come from a bit of going back on the original premise, was the vehicles that they get out of their spaceship at that point, the sky cutters and the nose diver. And you absolutely hate the nose diver, don't you?
You have to kind of lie down on it and spread your legs out like you're going to have a baby and stick your head in this kind of helmet bit. You look really stupid piloting that.
But I was being reminded while you were speaking just now about how well done in the pilot all the stuff with Jaga and Lion-O and the Sword of Omens and the Eye of Thundera actually is. And again, it's all part of the nice build-up to the suspension capsule stuff. And one of the things that I thought was a bit disappointing about the broadcast TV version, although obviously it needs to be cut for time, was that there's much less lead-in to the Thundercats getting into the capsules and Jaga saying he's not going to come with them and they try and persuade him and he won't. And that's all very powerfully and effectively done on the video. And yet it seems to mean nothing in the long-term future of the show, with people, as you say, just popping back and forth from Plundar, going to make new Thundera somewhere. The sense of space and distance and remoteness that is so nicely set up on that video doesn't last at all, and what a shame.
They did some good characterization in that bit too, and setting up the whole thing with the Eye of Thundera and the power and how important it is, and Lion-O's destiny. Of course, Lion-O is a child at that point, and either he has a faulty suspension capsule or Wily Cat and Wily Kits are exceptionally good because he grows up and they don't. But anyway, he's a child when Jaga is showing him the Eye of Thundera, embedded in the hilt of the Sword of Omens. Very symbolic phallus there related to Lino coming of age and gaining his power. And it's really cool, that bit where he's left with the sword and Snarf, the two weakest people on the ship, are left with the most important thing on the ship, and obviously the mutants then board and try to come and get it, and the Eye wakes up and the sword grows, becomes even more phallic and scares the mutants off, and lifts itself in Lionel's hands because he hasn't been able to lift it, and as he explains, after the mutants have fled, the sword kind of did it for me. It's incredibly cool. And then all the baddies, all the mutants and Mumm-Ra are after the Eye of Thundera, and then that very quickly lets everyone know that it's no good to them. Mumm-Ra gets hold of it in that episode, Pum-Ra, and tries to use it, and they're going, oh, sorry Mumm-Ra, it's not going to work for you, you're evil. So very quickly, before they even get their spaceships and stuff, they know that Eye of Thundera is not really much good to anyone but Lino, and as we discovered only then when it feels like it, didn't we? It's so capricious. The Sword of Omens and the Eye of Thundera will do or not do whatever the writers need.
Yes, it probably is the worst culprit for that in any show that I've seen, or certainly can think of. All that build-up in that scene you were talking about with Lina going, I can't lift it, Jaga. No, you are not yet a man, and things. It's all terribly effective, as I say, on the video, in the movie version. And another thing we noticed about the movie video version being better than the broadcast TV version, and this was true in all 4 constituent episodes, but the background music is so much better in the video version. It's very, very effective. There are lots of examples. Big one for both of us, I think, being the scene where Lino and Snarf meet the Burbills, and then the next scene where Robert Bill comes and cuts them free of their bindings that the other Burbills have put them in. On the video, it's a great bit of tension build-up. And as Rosie pointed out to me that I had noticed when I watched the DVD myself, cuts a bit in the broadcast version, TV version, Snarf going, it may not be a good idea to make him sore, Lionel. Just a little bit of extra tension there before you finally see what Robert Bill is going to do with a knife.
Yes, with a couple of seconds of him advancing with the knife, you hardly even see him do that. It's like, knife cut the bonds, there we go, we're friends. Not effective at all, really.
And then you get all the lovely tinkly, everything's going to be alright music, and the Burbills suddenly seem really friendly and fun, which they are, to be fair to them.
I love the Burbills, they're so funny.
And that reminds me of the point how we end up with far too many funny little creatures and things that already live on Third Earth. The Burbills, like Thundercats, we discover, are refugees from space, and they make a lot of sense. And we are happy, as the Burbills are happy, for the Burbills and Thundercats to be neighbours. But when they start introducing all these stupid little sheep people, and the Wallows, who are very weird beavery things, and those pigs, and the unicorn keepers, who are sort of half unicorn, half person. It's really strange. And as for Hammerhand and the Berserkers, Rosie hates them.
Are there those people on that ship?
Yes, the pirates.
Yes, I can't really remember why I hate them now. I think I've deliberately forgotten all about them because they made me puke.
But a big problem related to that, and coming back to what we were saying earlier, is there's much too much humanity on Third Earth.
You didn't mention the forest women. Of course, they're humans.
And I was saying while we were watching it, I could accept the forest women, and I did remember them from going live actually, but I can kind of accept them because they're a kind of primitive, regressed society of humans, a few that have survived, and very sensibly, they haven't got any men, although perhaps they do keep some men locked up in cages for breeding every 7 years. But Munkian says something very tantalising in that pilot, doesn't he, about maybe they're living in caves and things. And we see that there are sort of primitive cavemen, troglodyte sort of things around on Third Earth, which is another way to have remnants of humanity that kind of makes sense, regress back to primitive ways. So the forest women and the troglodytes, okay, yeah, fine, they work well enough, but then when we get onto the great ocean plug and these scientists led by Dr. Dometone who live under the ocean and are very much just human, and he even says in that, for the sake of remaining humanity, that's too much.
They're all men, aren't they? And I was saying, oh, they should get together with the forest women and have some babies. That's cool, though, isn't it? That scene where the mutants are speculating about the civilization of which they've found the remains and whether there are any people left, and they find Mumm-Ra's statues of Anubis and people like that, and they're saying maybe it's an ancient race of mutants.
All that stuff is so brilliant in that pilot/movie, Exodus movie. It's excellent.
And of course, they really take it up to the ideal point with inhabitants of Third Earth, don't they? With the brute men. We meet the Burbles, fine, we like them. They're also aliens. And then there's this very, very primitive race of people that we say are more like cows than any other animal. They're not that much like cows. I suppose sort of buffalo they remind me of the most. And the Thundercats are quite rude about them, actually. They're simple lives and not much upstairs, and that kind of thing. So there's a sort of animal-y, anthropomorphic-y race that don't really do very much, and I was wondering where the brute women were, wasn't I? When the mutants had enslaved the brute men, I don't think any of them were women.
And they were at home making bread and wondering where all their men had got to, perhaps.
But that's plenty of other races on this remote, desolate planet that they managed to find as a last resort when their ship was all damaged and everything.
Yes, that video really does go up to the right point, as you say. And, yeah, quickly we're going back on and going too far away from that concept. And what a shame. So, yeah, in many ways, it's a shame we're not just podcasting about that video, because then we'd be very complimentary.
One of the bits they cut from the video was the Thundercats, besides Lion-O, meeting the Burbles and actually doing quite a bit to help them. But what they were helping them with was so stupid. There were these giants who lived up a mountain, making these dog people come and steal all their fruit. And that was silly, so I think overall I do prefer it without that. And Lion-O does help them when Mumm-Ra comes along in the shape of several locusts, and then they all come together to form this big locust, and it makes me laugh, a Burble going, oh my goodness, because that's how you would react in that situation, isn't it? And it's funny when they say these things with this sort of robotic monotone that they have.
Yes, from a plot point of view, I was moved to point out when I first watched the DVDs, the TV version of the episode called Burbles, episode 3, does make a lot more sense when Mumm-Ra says the Thundercats have befriended the Burbles. All the Thundercats have, in fact, befriended, done things for and with the Burbles as a whole, whereas when he says it on the video, it's just Lion-O and Snarf have met the Burbles. But, of course, I agree with you, I'd much rather watch the video version because it's far less stupid. I touched earlier on the elitism of Thundera and the Code of Thundera, so let's just expound that and then say a word about the characters. As we know in no uncertain terms from the new Thundercats in Season 2, Thundercats Ho the movie, Bengali, Primera and Linkso, Thundera was a very elitist, social structured place where the Thundercats were the ruling class and Thunderian commoners just do their blacksmithing and other manual work for them and be glad just to be alive.
And the poor Snarfs. They're a sort of serving race. I don't know if they get any actual money or anything other than their board and lodging for working for Thundercats, and Thunderians who aren't Thundercats perhaps, or perhaps only Thundercats are allowed Snarfs. And when I was younger, I wasn't sure if they were native to Thundera. I didn't really understand about Thundera anyway, did I? I wasn't sure if they were Thundercats, if they were supposed to be the same kind of thing, but they were in some ways kind of more like actual cats, in some ways kind of less like actual cats. Then I wasn't sure if they were an alien species, but it seems they are native to Thundera, and they do all the grunt work.
Snarf claims to have thunder dollars at one point, when it's revealed that there's this colony of Snarf that have also escaped, of which Snarf's nephew is a member, but that's the only mention of Snarf's having money. And yeah, they still treat Snarf like crap and make him do all the hard work. He does all the laundry and the cooking and things when they're on Third Earth. And they're horrible to him a lot of the time. I mean, as everybody knows, Snarf is an extremely annoying character.
You just want to say, Snarf, can you just shut up for a minute, like in South Park?
But he doesn't deserve the crap he gets. And actually, he says some very sensible things at times, like when he was telling the older Thundercats not to blindly, excessively tell off the Thunderkittens, but talk to them sensibly and listen to what they were trying to say. He often gives Lion-O very good advice, or naggy advice, but good advice, about being careful and thinking before he acts. Because as we know, Lion-O spent 10 galacto years in a suspension capsule, and he grew physically, but not emotionally. He still needs Snarf and relies on Snarf in many ways.
Especially when the ghost of Jaga stops bothering to turn up and give him advice.
But I always thought it was kind of dodgy how the Thundercats make all the other Thunderians sacrifice themselves by surrounding the flagship so the mutants can kill everyone except the 7 Thundercats who are on the flagship and Snarf. And it seems that that's not just an anomaly that Leonard Starr, the head writer, needed to include just to get the pilot moving. It is actually how Thunderian society works. The survival of the noblest. And what a load of crap that is.
Yes, of course, the Eye of Thundera, when it feels like doing anything, will only do it for Lion-O. It's supposed to alert him when there's a Thundercat in danger, which implies that if there were more Thunderans around, it wouldn't tell him about them if they weren't Thundercats. Does it bother telling him if Snarf's in danger?
Yes, it does sometimes.
When it feels like it. But sometimes it takes its sweet time, and they have time to get him to some quite serious trouble before the Eye thinks it can be bothered. And it will only do anything for Lion-O, and you were telling me after you'd watched the DVD, it won't do anything for Wily Cat in Lion-O's body or Lion-O in Wily Cat's body. It's the most terrific snob. It will only do anything for the Lord of the Thundercats.
This is something that really annoyed me when I first watched the DVDs, and it's really dangerous at times. There's this part where everybody's frozen except Chitara, and the Eye of Thundera really needs to wake up for Chitara, but it won't do it. Chitara has to put it in Lion-O's hand before it will react. And yeah, I like the body swapping episode, which is, I think, the second to last in the first season. It's one of the ones that I actually enjoy and think actually makes sense. And it has some point to it because Panthro and Snarf swap bodies and learn something about appreciating each other more and each other's strengths, which are different from their own strengths. And then Lion-O and Wily Cat swap bodies, as you say, and the Eye of Thundera should be quite happy to obey Lion-O in the body of another Thundercat, or it should be quite happy to open up for Wily Cat, another Thundercat, whoever's body he's in, I think, and it is harmful and dangerous, the way it is so elitist.
And we better talk about the anointment trials now, which I kind of remembered from when I was younger. I particularly remembered his race with Chitara, or the end of it anyway.
And it was so funny because we found it on a video with a bit of Fantastic Max,
which we just podcasted about, and we'd been talking about it too, hadn't we, for some reason?
Yes.
I was saying, I remember Lion-O racing Chitara, and she's ahead, but she flags at the end. Being a cheater, she can't run at her full speed indefinitely, although she can keep it up for a lot longer than a real cheater. But what I had forgotten was that each trial is a whole episode. I thought maybe they were 2 episodes between them, but they have to have a lot of faffing about traversing obstacles and things before he gets to each Thundercat to compete against them. And I do remember I didn't understand that. I was like, why is he fighting his friends? I vaguely remembered as well he had to beat Panthro in a test of strength, and Panthro got injured by a rock or something falling on his shoulder, and it turned out I was absolutely right about that. So obviously it was quite memorable, But it turns out the reason for it, which, as I said, I didn't understand when I was little, is that the Lord of the Thundercats has to prove that he's the best at everything before he's allowed to actually be Lord of the Thundercats. And who was saying, oh, I don't think we should do this anymore, basically? Was it Lion-O himself?
Lion-O himself is really against the idea.
And then the ghost of Jaga turns up and says, oh, you have to do it, Lion-O. It's the Thundercat tradition and the Lord of the Thundercats and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And I said, well, what if the ghosts of our ancestors came and told us we had to do things like they used to do them? There'd be slavery, there'd be nothing for women. Perhaps we'd still be doing all the horrible things the Romans used to do. I said, you don't have to listen to him, Lion-O. He's dead.
Those anointment trials are really, really dangerous. Even without the mutants interfering with them, they cause serious danger to Lion-O and the other Thundercats when he's fighting them.
And they're completely wrong in principle as well.
I was mentioning this on a very early podcast we did. It may well have been Watership Down, talking about Hazel. Because, as we know, the leader shouldn't necessarily be the best at everything, but the anointment trials do imply that the Lord of the Thundercats has to be, no matter how they want to dress it up, by saying, oh, I wouldn't fancy fighting you at your full strength, Panthro, and oh, I can only beat Chitara over this final 2 miles. It's still extremely dodgy in my opinion.
We may have said the same thing, I'm sure we did, in fact, about Tai and Digimon.
And it's all very true. And Lion-O perhaps realises this, and it's very progressive of him. They're making a new society, maintaining some of their laws and ideals fine, but they should be very prepared to sit at their Thundercat Council, which we see them doing at times, and decide which parts of their heritage are absolute crap and get rid of them. And they should have done so, I think, with the anointment trials.
Especially now that Thundera's blown up and they've gone and set up a new home and they really do have to start from scratch.
I was saying I think all 7 of them, including Snarf, they should value him for his role in the team and for his potentially casting vote, as he makes 7 of them living. They should have all got together to discuss the anointment trials. Lion-O should have said why he thought they were rubbish, and then they would all have had one vote for do we continue the anointment trials.
We thought it might have been 3-3 between the Thundercats, didn't we? Lion-O and the 2 younger ones voting get rid of them, and the 3 older ones voting keep them.
I thought initially it would be 4-3 in favour of getting rid of them, with Snarf voting to get rid of them because he thinks they're awful and dangerous to Lion-O. But yeah, we've seen that Wily Kit and Wily Cat are open to new ideas and new experiences more than the older Thundercats. I think they would vote for Lion-O.
Yes, although they might like to carry it on just for a laugh. They enjoyed this, didn't they? Their test of cunning, playing tricks on Lion-O in that cave.
Yes, perhaps they would like to do it in a less extreme, less dangerous, less life-threatening way.
Oh, like the Olympics.
Yes, exactly. But then I thought, perhaps, rather than a 4-3 win, it might even have been 5-2, and Chitara might have voted to get rid of the anointment trials. Tigra, who's quite old, as Lion-O says, he's the oldest Thundercat after Jaga dies, and that's why he's head of the Thundercats Council, Tigra is. With a great age comes great wisdom, but also great stubbornness and foolishness in some way.
Getting stuck in your ways.
But Tigra would definitely have voted to keep them, and Panthro would definitely have voted to keep them. But I think Chitara could have been talked round. And yeah, as I say, I don't think Thunderkittens would want to continue the anointment trial in their current form, at least, and Lion-O and Snarf would definitely vote against them. So they'd have come out with something different, but instead they just blindly go ahead and do them, and it's terribly dangerous, terribly pointless. It allows the mutants to cause a lot of trouble, and yeah, it's just a really bad sequence of events, really. It contains some quite nice scenes, particularly with the Thunderkittens, I think. But as a concept, it's highly flawed, and I don't approve of it at all.
I do remember when I was little sussing that they each had a special power and saying to our mum, well, what's Lion-O's power? And she said, being the leader. And I wasn't very satisfied with that at all.
And as Hazel and Ty prove, that can be a very good and very effective power, but they kind of undermine it, don't they, with things like the anointment
trial. Yes, I suppose I wasn't satisfied with it because it wasn't a superpower like the others have, but you get past these things usually when you get older.
Well, they got together 6 actors to record all the voices for Thundercats, and a very game bunch they are. They have to have a lot of patience to read a lot of the very stupid dialogue, and you can hear on the very famous Thundercats outtakes that are all over YouTube and various places how much they used to have to laugh and muck around and enjoy themselves to get through the recording sessions. But yes, a very game bunch and a very talented bunch indeed, I think. As I say, 6 of them originally hired for Thundercats, and as far as we can tell at the time of recording this podcast in November 2018, 3 of them are still alive and 3 of them are dead. And we'll start with the still alive ones, and first of all, they got Larry Kenny as Lion-O, and his other main character is Jackal. And I would have said, if pressed when I was little, that Jackalman was my favourite mutant. And I guess I did used to find him rather less annoying than the other 2. I didn't really like Vultureman much because he was a kind of usurper, but actually we've discovered Vultureman really is the best, most competent mutant who do much better without the others. But they often call Jackalman cowardly jackal, and they do sometimes exclude him from things, Monkey and Slide. And he is the one who went off on his own and tried to get together an army and make a secret deal with Mumm-Ra and things a couple of times. So I guess he's reasonably interesting as a character, Jackalman.
I always just kind of felt the same way about all 3 of the mutants, and now I'd say that I think Jackalman has the least character of all of them.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment. Also still alive is Peter Newman, who voiced Tigra, Wily Cat, and Monkey originally. And if you had said to him after recording the pilot, well, Peter, which one of those 3 characters do you think you will be voicing still in the final episode ever at the end of season 4? Which one do you think it will be? He'd have said, well, Tigra, I should think. And then you'd have said to him, no, Wily Cat. Tiger and Monkey are going to fade away by the end of season 4. And Peter would have been very surprised. And we've just talked about Tigra, really. His power of invisibility was always rather pleasing, linking in with tigers and their camouflage.
I didn't understand that at all, actually, when I was younger. I understood Chitara's power of speed, best of all. That makes the most sense. Panthro's power of strength I wasn't very satisfied with, because I didn't think panthers were really stronger than other cats, and I think I was right. And then I was like, well, what's Tigra's power invisibility for? Tigers can't go invisible. And then someone explained to me about camouflage, and I thought, okay. But then watching the DVDs, which I didn't really realise before, I was disappointed because he's got a magic whip that does it, and anyone could do that if they had the magic whip, so I don't think that really counts as power, actually.
There was a bit that was always really annoying on the otherwise wonderful video, which is obviously an animation/storyboarding mistake, where Monkeyan says, anything I can see I can hit with my rock-shooting shield, and that is the cue for Tigra to disappear. You can't see him, so you can't hit him. But he doesn't disappear. He just flicks away the stones and then pulls Monkeyan off his feet. I actually remember thinking for the first time when I was little, you can tell that they have certain people doubling up or tripling up on voices in cartoons. And the first one I really thought that about was, Monkeyan is Tigra, but going ooh, ooh, and stuff, doing a kind of monkey voice. And I don't say it's a bad voice at all, but I did notice that, and of course you can tell that Wily Cat is Tigra, but a lot younger.
I was actually quite enjoying Monkeyan's kind of stuff, because it makes him very much like a monkey, which is something I would have appreciated as a youngster. I think I wanted them to be more like the animals they were supposed to represent, and particularly when he's like frightened by Mumm-Ra or something and he does kind of screaming, I found that very effective.
And speaking of Wily Cat, I do enjoy the Thunderkittens, Wily Kit and Wily Cat. I did when I was young, and I do think they lift quite a lot of episodes quite a long way when they're on screen actually in that first season.
I like that episode. It was quite an early one where Wily Cat falls down a hole or something into this place that's full of booby traps, and Wily Kit and Lion-O have to go in and look for him.
Tower of Traps, that one's called. I like that one. I do like their interplay together, Wily Kit and Wily Cat, and I do think they find it hard at times to really know how they fit in with the older Thundercats. Sometimes they're very, cross parents towards Thunderkittens. Sometimes they treat the Thunderkittens as just sort of equals, go and man this bit of equipment, go and save this person from this situation. Sometimes they're quite protective of them. I do think it must be hard for Wily Kit and Wily Cat, being all each other really has in the world that they can emotionally and practically rely on. But they certainly do work very well together and make a good wily team and can rely on each other very much. They're one of those couples that you're not sure when you're little whether they're supposed to be siblings or a romantic couple or what. And apparently they're twins. And occasionally they do finish each other's sentences like twins are supposed to do, but I never noticed that when I was little. I always thought they acted more like a couple, and they do flirt with each other.
I suppose it's supposed to be a sort of sibling banter, but it comes across as rather sexual sometimes.
Yes, I wonder if perhaps if they got real kids to voice them, it would come across as less sexual, and they wouldn't just sound like Tiger and Chitara being younger, but having a romantic relationship. But nevertheless, they both do very good voice acting for them.
I like them too, and I always did. I was fairly satisfied with their power being cunning and nipping around, kind of physical stuff, and they have tools, weapons, like Tigra. They have their pellets, which do things like emit a choking gas and slimy stuff so that you slip over on it, and dinosaurs in some cases. You put them in water and they expand into dinosaurs. But I was okay with that because they would just complement the power that they had innately, whereas Tiger's whip, I mean, anyone could use that, couldn't they, to become invisible? But the problem I did have with them was that I could not figure out what sorts of cats they were supposed to be. Wily Kit actually has Lion-O's hair but with a black streak in it, and they've both got orange hair and a blue or primarily blue costume for complementing the hair, which looks very good design-wise, but I used to think, okay, so is she a lion as well? And then, well, Wily Cat's definitely not one. He looks more like a tiger, but he's not all covered in stripes like Tigra is. I was fairly satisfied with how tiger-like Tigra was, by the way. I thought he looked enough like a tiger. And I don't know how long it took me to find out that they were supposed to be wild cats. I think I must have read that on the internet, or maybe you did and you told me.
Yes, I think so. I was quite interested to spot when watching the DVDs. Yes, they are very emotionally reliant on each other. They do sleep in twin beds in the same room and crawl under the sheets together in the middle of the night to play jacks, or perhaps just to comfort each other emotionally, really. Another thing I noticed that's quite subtle is that one thing that does make them an effective team and helps them to bolster each other is that Wily Kit, being a girl, is slightly more agile and nippy, and Wily Cat, being a boy, is slightly stronger, and they do, as I say, bolster each other in that way. When Wily Kit is falling off stuff, she relies on Wily Cat to catch her and hold her and look after her physically, but she's the one that's slightly better at actually doing the wily, leapy, jumpy, rolly stuff. So they are a very much complementary pair.
A good bit on the video is that chase through the trees with Monkeyn, isn't it? And I liked that as a child because I thought Monkeyn ought to be using the trees because he was a monkey. I did used to like to relate things to what I could understand. And Wily Cat and Wily Kit are very nippy in the trees, and I wasn't sure if wildcats did use the trees that much. But when we went to Shepperth Wildlife Park, that Scottish wildcat was up in a tree, wasn't it, having a snooze?
I always liked that bit of the Brutemen episode much more than the rest of the episode. Particularly the end, where Tigra, Panthro, and Chitara are just narrating what the mutants and the Brutemen and Lion-O are doing. And yeah, that is a very good bit for the Thunderkittens of that episode. There's an episode in the first season where the Thunderkittens try to prove themselves as proper grown-up Thundercats by stealing the Thundercat weapons and going to use them against the mutants. But as we noticed in that episode, and as we knew already, the Thunderkittens are more than a match for any mutant or any few mutants at once, using their own skills and their own weapons, and hopefully that's what they learned, and Lion-O learned, from the episode. I like the bit where Wily Kit and Wily Cat are sort of backed against the battlements of Castle Plundar, and Slither's advancing on them menacingly and reaching for them. But using their skills, they just slip their bolos over his wrists and use him as an anchor to abseil down the walls of Castle Plundar and run away.
That is a good trick.
That was absolutely brilliant. And I like the bit as well, which is very irrelevant to the rest of the episode, which has a giant sort of robot or rock monster attacking Cat's lair in it. But I like the bit at the beginning of that episode where Wily Kit and Wily Cat absolutely beat the crap out of Jackalman and tied him to a tree and then nicked his sky cutter and flew off with it. I thought that was brilliant. That was a really nice moment for the pair of them as a duo and as a force. And then stupidly Panthro and Lino turn up in the Thunder Tank and start shooting at them, and you don't really go anywhere from there in the plot. But that bit where they nick the sky cutter I thought was very memorable and very good.
Yes, another time Lino nicks the sky cutter and gets shot at by a fellow Thundercat. It's Tigra, I think.
That's in Thundercats Ho the movie, when Tigra is showing off one of the new vehicles that we can go out and buy if we want to.
Yes, of course, the Thunder Tank's the only proper vehicle, and we didn't talk about that, did we? I always thought that was kind of cool, but it was very annoying when it was raining boulders for some reason, and it sometimes does, and Panthro's going, the Thunder Tank wasn't designed to withhold a boulder attack, and we're like, that's the first thing it did.
That is the very first thing it did to prove itself. That's right. Cat's lair and its telescopic equipment and the Thunder Tank is all stuff that's been salvaged from the spaceship when it crashed, and rocks and stones and things that come from the local environment, and that's all very much in keeping with the original premise. So it's part of that initial being stranded there and making the best of it that we loved so much. Pretty sure Panthro says he can get enough stuff together to build a Thunder Tank, implying that they've had Thunder Tanks on Thundera before and they all know what he's talking about.
I like that exchange with Wily Cat. Wow, you made this just from junk you scrounged from the spaceship. And Panthro's like, I built it from equipment I salvaged from the spaceship. Good bit of interplay there.
Character interplay at its best on that video, just like everything else, really.
I did think he should have emphasised equipment as well as salvage like I did, but he actually didn't, did he?
The other actor who's still alive in 2018 is Lynn Lipton, who of course was hired to voice all the women. Now, initially, of course, that's Chitara and Wily Kit. Chitara sounding older and Wily Kit sounding younger, absolutely fine. But then, of course, they start piling women on her like there's no tomorrow, don't they? Mandora the Evil Chaser, all the forest women, the Unicorn Woman, for instance.
Yes, and the voices start to get a bit stupid, don't they?
Just like Linda Gary in He-Man, she really does struggle. And of course, they do get another woman, Jeren Raphael, to be, don't know how you pronounce her name, to be Primira, and she helps out with other women as the show goes on, including one called Jaguara, I believe. It just goes to show how they've been producing new Thundercats so they can sell lots of new action figures left, right, and centre. That's the trouble with the original premise. Artistically, it's absolutely brilliant, but in terms of selling action figures, it's extremely limiting. So you need to be able to have new Thundercats, walrus people, and various other things, Safari Joe, to keep the toy line going.
Speaking of Safari Joe, I actually thought a big game hunter after the Thundercats, and particularly Lino, because the lion's on that list kind of officially, isn't it? Was quite a good idea, but he just kind of turns up out of space, which is a bit disappointing.
And he has this funny little robot assistant who has the head of a steam locomotive. It's really, really weird. But you know, I remembered Safari Joe as being a big game hunter that Mumm-Ra summoned from the mists of time, as he sometimes does summon people and creatures from the mists of time using his cauldron. And I thought that made sense. Yes, Mumm-Ra wants the greatest hunter in the galaxy. He calls on Safari Joe to hunt the Thundercats. Great.
You could even get him out of history if you wanted.
Exactly. But then when he just turns up in his spaceship saying, oh, I've heard there's Thundercats here, I've hunted all the cats, now I'm going to hunt Thundercats, that was rather disappointing. I'd much rather have seen the Mumm-Ra brings him in MacGuffin way of getting a character in. They could have had him in the toy line in that way. They get rather lazy with it.
When I was young, I think I would have said Chitara was my favourite. I used to kind of not want to say the female one was my favourite because I didn't want to pander to people's expectations too much, but I understood her. Her name's Chitara, she's a cheetah and she can run fast, and I could connect with that. She's got yellow hair with spots in and some spots on her bare skin. I was quite happy with that.
And the other three actors have died since the olden days, since the turn of this century, as will happen. And the one that's died most recently is Earl Hyman, who I would always look him up after watching Thundercats and see, goodness me, he's still alive. And he actually died about a year before we recorded this podcast. I think it was November 17, and he was 91. And he is actually the only actor with only one regular character, because his voice is so distinctive as Panthro. They actually got him a couple of times to voice the ancient spirits of evil talking to Mumm-Ra in the first season. And we then make Mumm-Ra say at the end of the scene, oh yeah, thanks Panthro, because his voice is very distinctive and not very adaptable like the other actors' voices. So it's probably wise just to give him the one regular character. But you were saying to me, which I thought was a fair and interesting comment, you thought Panthro was the best actor in terms of making it real.
I did say I think he delivers the lines as you would say it in real life, whereas the other actors all deliver the lines in the style of voicing this particular type of cartoon, and I don't say there's anything wrong with that. Maybe Earl Hyman connects with it in such a way that it feels more real to him. I don't know, and he can channel the character in that way. Unless it's my imagination, I don't know if anyone would agree with me about this.
And I hadn't really thought about it before, but I did see exactly what you meant when you said that, and yes, I do agree. He perhaps inhabits the character more than presenting the kind of construct characters very skillfully that the other actors do. The next most recent one to pass on was Bob McFadden, who played principally Snarf and Sly. Of course, they do all voice guest characters left, right, and centre. You could say that he's the only one, originally, who doesn't get to voice a Thundercat, unless you count Snarf as a Thundercat, which he is in many ways, though not really in the most pure way. But they do give him one of the new Thundercats, Lynxo, to voice.
The new Thundercats are a completely stupid idea, of course, but had I seen Lynxo as a child, which I don't think I did I? I'd have been quite satisfied with him because he's got pointy ears and he's got lynx markings in his facial hair. I wouldn't have been very satisfied with his power, which is to have enhanced senses since he went blind. I would think that wasn't at all to do with lynxes the way I understood them.
He also does a kind of Vulcan nerve grip, which is weird.
Lynxes can't do that.
But I've read praise for the versatility of Bob McFadden doing Slythe and Snarf and how incredibly different they are. At the beginning, I think that's true, but as I was saying when we were watching it, I think they get very close at times. Perhaps they're two quite ambitious voices that he rather regretted committing to for 65 episodes and then 3 more seasons afterwards.
Like Urtgor, we talked about him struggling with the voice, didn't we?
Indeed. I do think at times Snarf and Sly do find a lot of middle ground that doesn't quite sound like either of them originally did. But still, Bob McFadden certainly plays his part very well in the series.
Sly was annoying me with his catchphrase, wasn't he? He said yes at the end of some sentences, and some writers were having him say it at the end of every sentence. So it was like, oh, hello, Jackalman, yes. Really annoying. I think he should only say it when it's appropriate to the sentence.
And the other actor was Earl Hammond, who I read was a very experienced radio voice actor since the 1940s and had done some TV work as well latterly. And I do actually think, I have thought at times, he perhaps has the most range without doing silly sort of voices, the most range with his own kind of natural pitch of all the actors. And you'll usually hear him voicing guest stars who just need a different voice rather than a particularly striking voice.
They don't need to sound like a sheep or anything.
Exactly. I think he has a lot of voices within his own range. And as I've expressed at times, I think partly what they valued in his natural voice was that he sounded quite old. He was in his 60s. He sounded quite old and wise to voice Jaga. And I would guess that Jaga is somewhere close to his real voice. But he also voiced Mumm-Ra, which is the kind of old voice with extra sepulchral aspects, which I think is very effective. And when he's doing Mumm-Ra as Mumm-Ra, who you mentioned earlier, I think that's a very good voice. Sounds very natural, very friendly when he's trying to trick the Thundercats, managing to trick the Thundercats, and then lapses back into the evil Mumm-Ra voice at times. So I do admire Earl Hammond's range in that way. And of course the other regular he was given was Vultureman. If you find Vultureman's first couple of production order appearances, he's being voiced by Bob McFadden with a kind of screechy bird voice, and it's very, very close to Snarf, too close to Snarf, and Earl Hammond manages to find a much more sustainable, much more unique bird-like voice for Vultureman, which I think works very well.
Funnily enough, Vultureman's probably the one I'm going to say the nicest things about. I had completely forgotten him from going live, and when he first turned up, I said he looks stupid in that skirt he's got on. What did we think it was supposed to be, a sort of Egyptian thing?
Yes, he's an Egyptian vulture, and that's his Egyptian walk like an Egyptian skirt.
And I was wondering, what do they need a fourth mutant for? But then I noticed he was doing inventing, and he was doing all the science and stuff. And I thought, oh, that's what they need him for. But that brings a problem in itself, because suddenly Tigra is an equal scientist. Okay, he's an architect, he designs the cat's lair. Some people seem to think he's called Tigra the Architect. But then he starts making all these sort of, I don't know, antidotes and things.
We have to get to Tigra's lab and analyse Vultureman's potions so we can save ourselves.
Yes, that sort of thing. So that wasn't very good. They should have had a proper scientist all along, like they did in Extreme Dinosaurs. They had Stegs on the side of the goodies and Spitter on the side of the baddies, the raptors, to be the equal force on different sides in terms of science. But anyway, once I realised that Vultureman was doing all this science, I also realised that it was working, and his inventions were actually very effective, like the body swapping device and the voice changer particularly. He was doing some awfully good tricks with the voice changer, luring the Thundercats to various places with each other's voices. And then I realised his plans were working, and then the other mutants were messing them up for him. And I said, Vultureman's the only halfway competent villain they've got, and I include Mumm-Ra in that.
Yes, I like Vultureman too for those reasons. If you want to talk about suddenly Tigra, I think the best thing is where he suddenly has mental illusion powers.
Oh my goodness, that's his anointment trial, isn't
Yes.
it? Like, what do they call it?
Mind power. The trial of mind power. And I say, oh, they've suddenly got Tigra confused with Mandrake from Defenders of the Earth, because they have.
We used to speculate that perhaps his anointment trial was stealth, which makes a lot more sense. They should have to sneak up on some antelope or something.
I like how Leonard Starr includes in that one, like, all the Tigra clan, and you get that explanation for the Thundercats. They're kind of like the animals of farming wood. They're called Lion-O, Tigra, Chitara, because they're the main representatives, and now the last representative of their tribes, of their type. So that makes a lot of sense.
In a sense it does, but it's also quite obviously that they came up with these characters and these names, and then someone said, well, hold on a minute, aren't there other cheetah people than tiger people? So they made up a bit of an excuse, if you wanted to be cynical.
But Wily Cat says in that one, well, why hasn't Tigra used these mental powers before? Panthera's like, oh, he's been saving himself for the anointment trial. And Wily Cat's like, whatevs. But yes, Mumm-Ra. I've nominated at times Mumm-Ra as my favourite villain, cartoon villain at all, from the telly, from anything. And I did used to enjoy him a lot.
I'm sure Skeletor would be very upset.
I used to be very disappointed on going live if it was an episode with all mutants and no Mumm-Ra, and yes, there's plenty with both, but there's some with mutants instead. Interestingly, some writers seem to think that Mumm-Ra is like Krang to the mutants,
and Stampede and Complex and that kind of character.
whereas other writers realise he's not really like that. They've kind of made this tentative deal, and Mumm-Ra is the most powerful force of evil on Third Earth. Mutants kind of work for him because they're kind of afraid of him, but it's not really like he's the big boss baddie and directs the others to do things all the time, every week.
Yes, I can't remember which episode it was or what he was telling them to do, but I was getting rather grumpy with this bit where they're all in his pyramid and he was saying, right, you mutants go there and do this and get me that, and I'm like, no, that's not what it's supposed to be like.
But I still do really like the concept of Mumm-Ra, the ancient devil priest, the old Egyptian pyramid. As long as evil exists, Mumm-Ra lives. He's awoken by evil, he's powered by evil.
That reminds me of another issue I had with the premise getting messed up and all these civilizations. It's implied that he's been asleep, almost explicitly said all that you disturb my rest and stuff, until the Thundercats and the mutants came along. But surely, like these giants who make the dog people go and steal fruit, surely there's enough evil left in the world to sustain him if they would have us believe all these civilizations have been there the whole time.
Yes, another example of it not really fitting in with that lovely original video. And I always used to look forward to and enjoy ancient spirits of evil transform this decayed form to Mumm-Ra, the ever-living, and I'm like, wasn't that your name already? But it made him transform into his big fighting form, which was always very exciting, I thought.
Oh, I like the bit in the video where the mutants say something, I can't remember what it was, that make him think in a voiceover, they suspect I cannot leave my tomb. They shall learn otherwise, and it's very much implied that he has to be Mumm-Ra the ever-living to do this. And then I was very disappointed when he started walking around outside his tomb with his bandages and his red cloak on.
Yes, me too. I always took that away from the video and thought, it's a shame it wasn't followed through with. Mumm-Ra doesn't really fit in very well with the concept of the show, unlike the mutants who had all this beef with the Thundercats. They make sense as part of the story, but Mumm-Ra's a sort of generic evil villain that could go in any show just as well as Thundercats. And of course you'd voiced that thought to me quite some years ago when I was saying that I liked Mumm-Ra and you were saying what you thought the problem was with him. But as you were saying while we were watching it this time, he does really fit in with the theme.
Yes, I was never particularly into, like, powers and stuff for the sake of it like you were. Once I told you I wasn't that bothered about Merlin on Nightmare and you were horrified. And I think you might have been similarly horrified because we were quite a bit younger when I was saying I wasn't that bothered about Mumm-Ra either. And you were saying you don't like the mutants, do you? And I said, I think they fit in better with the premise and the themes and the whole thing that we're going for with being stranded in an alien world. But then watching it recently, I kind of took that back a bit. I thought that something left over from our world, the world that we knew, and a character left over from that worked quite well because he's a part of the planet that they come to, and I thought it also worked quite well thematically with good and evil being a universal theme, any civilizations, any time, any place.
But of course, what we both thought and have discussed about Mumm-Ra watching the series through this time, and you were saying when we were talking about Vultureman, is he's actually rather rubbish. He uses immortality as an excuse for extreme sloppiness. He's like, oh well, there's always next time when his plans have fallen completely flat and he hasn't followed through on them. And that's why he's still trying to fight the Thundercats in thousands of years' time in the new 2011 version of Thundercats, and still not doing that well at it, because he is rather sloppy.
It's not just that he's tried his very best to do his plans and they haven't worked and he said, oh well, next time. It's that he's actually messed them up.
He doesn't follow through on his plans at all. How many times did he successfully disguise himself and get to spend the night in the cat's lair? About 4, but he never did anything useful with that situations.
Why didn't he murder them in their beds? Because then there'd be no more show. It's the only real reason, isn't it?
Exactly. And there's that one with the magic harp, where Mumm-Ra comes up with this complicated plan, and it's all about manipulating the Thunderkittens, who again do some good, entertaining screen time for us. But Mumm-Ra doesn't follow through with that plan. He tries to betray the genie of the harp before the genie of the harp has finished destroying the Thundercats. And then Mumm-Ra's like, oh, the Thundercats are escaping while we're fighting. And we're like, well, of course they are. You shouldn't have betrayed the genie before he finished your evil plan.
And I was making you laugh, wasn't I, when Lino had to do the anointment trial of defeating his greatest enemy, which wouldn't have been Mumm-Ra on Thundera, but on Third Earth it is. And Mumm-Ra was looking in his magic pool going, I'm finally going to defeat Lino. And I said to him, you're going to cock it up. And that made you laugh. And he did, didn't he? They're fighting. And then Mumm-Ra picks up this log and throws it at his own sarcophagus and cracks it. And then he goes, my sarcophagus, my sarcophagus. So then Lino knows to destroy the sarcophagus. I mean, what a cock-up.
That really was all Mumm-Ra's fault, and I didn't remember how careless and inept he was when I remembered from going live the ends of those two episodes and found them quite exciting, because they both end with the Thundercats saying, this is the harp one and the final anointment trial one, we got rid of Mumm-Ra forever, hooray. And then of course Mumm-Ra rises from the lava or the ashes or whatever and says, you can't get rid of evil, you can't get rid of Mumm-Ra that easily. As long as evil exists, Mumm-Ra lives. Laughter, laughter, laughter. I used to love all that stuff. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts and the paperwork and the nitty-gritty and the admin of Mumm-Ra, he doesn't follow through. He's sloppy. He uses immortality as an excuse. And he's a very ineffective villain. So yeah, Vultureman is the best villain on the show if you stop and analyse them at all.
Of course, he's part of the whole thing about it not being sustainable, isn't it? He's so immortal and all-powerful that there's not that much they can do against him, but then he can't use all his powers and all his abilities, because if he did, the protagonist would be dead.
He's an overpowered character that causes problems in that way, like Snakeface on the new 2002 He-Man. And there are other examples that I can't think of right now.
So that leaves Jaga, and I had a huge problem with Jaga when I was young. I guess his power is wisdom, because he's old, even though actually his power has been stuck in his ways and making everyone else continue his ways. But I didn't think that was very Jaguar-y, but the only reason you know that he must be a Jaguar is from his name. He looks nothing like one, he hasn't got spots or anything, and I hated that. He just looks like a wise old man with a white beard, symbol of the patriarchy.
I used to like ghostly things as long as they weren't too scary, and I quite like the concept of Jaga appearing to Lino and giving him useful advice. And again, it's used very well on that initial video, where Jaga comes and explains to him why the Eye of Thundera won't come to life to go on a hunting spree for Lino. Your food supplies are plentiful at present, and those gentle creatures have as much right to the life force as you do. That's what we say to our cat when she brings in poor dying mice. She doesn't take any notice, but Lino takes notice of Jaga when he says it. And yeah, he is well used in that way, helping Lino to grow and learn and be a better person and Lord of the Thundercats.
I will always be with you, Lino, kind of thing, which really builds on all that characterization in the spaceship. And when I was little, I hadn't ever seen that, or if I had, I'd forgotten all about it, so I didn't really know who Jaga was, this ghost coming to give him advice all the time, so that's another reason why the video really did a lot for me.
And like everything else from the video, practically, it doesn't get carried on and sustained in the way it should be beyond that point. Jaga turns up very sporadically. I was saying, while we were watching it, if you did a tally of how many episodes Jaga is in out of the 65 in that season, I bet it would only just be in the teens. And even when he does turn up, he gives Lino terrible advice, mostly. Go and do the anointment trials, being the worst advice anyone ever gives
Yes, don't kill those buffalo or whatever they are. It's the best advice he gives. It's the first advice and the best advice.
He's a microcosm of the video, and the whole thing's coming after it, really.
Of course, in the video, he tells Lino he can call the Sword of Omens. Sword of Omens, come to my hand and all that. But again, it'll only do that when it feels like it.
And something that has annoyed me at times is, can the other Thundercats see and or how much do they believe in Jaga's existence? Guest characters are heard to remark, oh, the boy talks to himself, what a nutcase. And sometimes the other Thundercats don't seem to realise that Jaga is there conversing with Lino. But then at times, they do. What did Jaga say? And then apparently, they can all see him when Lino summons him to fight the spirit of Groon, the evil Thundercat from the past, who was actually the first Thundercat on Third Earth.
I sort of like the idea of Groon, by the way, because he's a Smilodon, a saber-toothed tiger or whatever you want to call it, and he was around before the current Thundercats. So I thought, oh, that makes sense, because Smilodons are ancestors of our cat and all the tigers and lions and things in the zoo and everyone. But of course, then it turns out he was contemporaneous with Jaga, and I thought, and so did you, I think at least in those flashbacks, Jaga ought to have looked younger, but he didn't. He had his white beard already.
Yes, that's being the first of many disappointing, not really making sense flashbacks to Thundera, where we do things like meet Lino's father Claudius and see Slithe and Vultureman together before Thundera even explodes. And inevitably, Thunderians and Thundercats in these flashbacks will be wearing clothes. Even though in the original video, Jaga says, well, we were all naked on Thundera, except me apparently, but here are some raiments and weapons to help you in the new world.
And they got no genitals, and they got no bottoms, and they got no nipples. I noticed that when I was younger and thought it very odd. I suppose I didn't think they ought to have drawn those things on, but I did think they ought not to have been naked in the first place.
It is very strange. But of course, in every other way, a very successful way to start that initial pilot is. As I mentioned there was a kind of failed reboot in 2011 on Cartoon Network. I mean, they did one season, and apparently it got rather bad ratings, and they didn't do any more because of that. We only watched the first half of it when it was on Channel 5, the first half of the season. We could, if we'd wanted to, have found the rest of the season at some point on Cartoon Network or something, but we never wanted to, because it wasn't that good. And like the original show, I think the first episode was rather good and set it up rather well and was rather intriguing.
It was one of those 3-part origin stories, wasn't it? And I thought the whole 3 parts were pretty watchable, fairly compelling in a way.
But then the rest of the series really let it down. Lion-O and Tigra, who were adoptive brothers in it, kept swapping roles of who was stupid and bratty and unreasonable and who wasn't, for example. And how many things of omens did they end up with? More than they should have done. More MacGuffins of omens than ever should be in a Thundercats show.
One of which was the Book of Omens, with Jaga's spirit trapped inside. Was he in the book or was he in something else?
He was in a lamp at first, but I think he did end up inside the book.
So not dead anyway, and that was stupid. And there were other problems with it, like the kinds of things that you get nowadays, like Chitara was much too much of a bitch, wasn't she? She was too much of a strong female woman to the extent that she would just go around sniping at everyone. And also, they were a terrible team.
Rather like the animals of Farthingwood.
Yes, I was noticing watching the proper Thundercats. Well, they're a good team. They work well together. And I was saying this to you the other day. I think it's because when you go to writing school and you learn screenwriting, you get told, right, there has to be conflict. So they make there be conflict between the protagonists, which is no good. So Lino and Tigra had this stupid, pointless rivalry. They were both after Chitara as well. It took Panther a while to turn up, didn't it? They sort of found him somewhere, and then he was a dick to everyone and grumpy. And I don't want to see that. Besides which, the episodes themselves were really stupid. I think the idea was quite interesting where there were these like amphibian people on this ship, and they were in a place where everything was sand and they were looking for water. So like it was like the sand was the sea and the water was like the land as we would understand it, and I thought that was quite clever subversion, but then I expect that they did the characterization very badly and ruined the idea.
What were the lights and the darkness in that series? The Robear Burbills adapted rather well. Burbills help Thundercats. They've seen the video, I said.
Yes, they are loads of fun and really cute in the original, and I think that was successfully carried over. They were saying funny things in their funny voices, and of course it finishes up with Barbel's love Panthro. The problem being that for most of the episodes, Panthro has been really grumpy and unreasonable with them, but that did make us laugh.
And when we got to the point where we stopped and Panthro had to put his arms into another dimension to keep Groon in that other dimension, I said, I'm sure the Robot Burbles will build him some robotic arms, and I've read that is indeed what happened, so that just proves how much they loved him.
Yes, I remember. I was like, so Panthro's arms are in another dimension. I mean, how stupid. But, of course, that's further evidence, because we'd been citing evidence of this, that the whole thing was a sequel to the original, not Panthro's arms being in another dimension. Going way back now to a minute or so ago when a Burble says Burble's help Thundercats. Maybe they haven't seen the video as such, but they have this in their heritage. Their ancestors helped the Thundercat ancestors. And of course there's other evidence too, like there's Thundercats all over the planet now, Mumm-Ra's still after them, and he's got himself a car.
Yes, that was another light in the darkness, I think. Tantalising idea of it being a sequel and Mumm-Ra being the same character, of course sadly couldn't be voiced by the same person, still using his immortality as an excuse for sloppiness. And indeed they got Larry Kenny, obviously original Rhino, to voice Claudus at the start of that 2011 series, and he says something like, when our ancestors, the Thundercats, first came to Third Earth. I mean, that makes it pretty clear, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I remember being quite interested in this episode where there was some different Thundercats going around in a spaceship for some reason. I don't know what the point of that was. It was a bit like a flashback or something, but it seemed to fit in with the idea that they'd been living on Third Earth for some time and advanced their technology and were travelling around, and it was a better time to be doing that than in the original series, wasn't it? With the Feeliner, their stupid spaceship.
Oh, yes, indeed. Drifting away from the premise a long way with the Feeliner.
And I do remember that the protagonist in that episode, or couple of episodes, was Cree Summer as some sort of panther Thundercat, and I found her quite memorable, though I don't remember her name.
I think it was Panthera.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
But the other light in the darkness, I think, in that series, and I think we both thought so at the time, was the Thunderkittens. Both done very well and voiced very well by actual kids this time. And they were highly entertaining, and when they were used well, which wasn't always, again, like the old Thunderkittens, they lifted the show.
I like their introduction. They were sort of street urchins, and they were kind of sort of pickpocketing. Wasn't one of them distracting people by playing a flute or something?
Oh yeah, Wiley Kit's flute to be part of the series.
And we were led to believe that they were busking, but actually, while she was doing that, Wiley Cat was picking people's pockets, which is not okay unless you're starving, which I think they were, weren't they?
And there was a big, complicated backstory about how they'd sacrificed their home lives so that their parents could look after their younger siblings and didn't have to spread the food too thin and stuff. So they were quite noble characters, really.
Oh, I've forgotten that, I must admit. The whole thing had quite an anime style about it, didn't it? And I do remember that Wiley Kit costume was quite midriffy, wasn't it? Like in Pokemon or something. And it was disappointing when they were hardly used.
They used to get stuck in the back of the Thunder Tank with useless, non-speaking Snarf, and none of them really do anything.
Oh goodness, Snarf looked just like a Pokemon, didn't he? And perhaps they thought it would be better if Snarf didn't speak so he wouldn't annoy anybody, but then there really wasn't anything for him to do. But you used to like quoting, "I love you, Candy Fruit," didn't you? Because Wiley Cat delivered that line very well. They were using the Burble's fruit as weapons, weren't they? And also eating it. Quite good fun, and the Thunderkittens really made a lot out of that. It's a good episode. I'd like a best-of DVD with the 3-part pilot origin story thing and the Burbles episode and maybe that one with Cree Summer.
Indeed, the Thunderkittens in scenes like that with the candy fruit did lift the show a lot. Yeah, that was very well delivered by Wiley Cat, and it was a nice link back to the original as well. Of course, the original we knew from the video. So there we are, more thoughts than you can shake a sword of omens at about Thundercats, and certainly more than enough for now. So hopefully you've enjoyed some or all of that, and you'll join us again next time, which will be the final Sunday in December, for a podcast on another 80s cartoon, which we watched on Going Live, Teenage Mutant Ninja / Hero Turtles. So until then,
Good night out there.
whatever you are.